Ever wonder what makes really creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life really as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lily Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how new ideas come to life and become paintings, sculptures, plays, or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community and explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. Today, I'll be ArtStorming with Linda Durham. Anyone who's traveled in the contemporary art circles in Santa Fe in the last 30 years knows the name. She helped shape the contemporary art scene here. When I first met her in 2016-17, she had already closed her gallery, but was still very influential in the lives of many artists. By that time, she was well into developing the Wonder Institute, which you'll hear more about in our conversation. I attended a few events hosted by Linda, and then our trajectories just seemed to take us in different directions. But as I was thinking about bringing this season to a close, with still so many people to talk to, I thought, who can I add to this season who would round it out and really give it some context? I still had a long list of people who absolutely belong in this season, but I only had a few episodes left. Minutes later, I was scrolling through my social media and I got my answer. I can't remember if it was one of her posts or a comment that she made on one of my posts, but Linda's name sprang from the screen and I had one of those duh moments. I messaged her and to my delight, she accepted right away. And here is that conversation. We are here, and I am with Linda Durham. I drove, it's like driving back east to get here. It was just a long way away, but such a beautiful drive and so worth the wait. And I was just about to say that this podcast would not be complete without you being part of it, because I think you have raised or represented or own artwork from almost every single person I've spoken to.
I think that's great. And I look forward to knowing, I don't know exactly who has been on your podcast and, because I am remiss in my podcast listening.
Oh, well, so that is not a problem at all.
I'm going to change.
No need. Because one of the things we were talking about off mic is that you're in the midst of a new project and you're deep in a book that you're about to write.
I am.
And
I've been writing it for 2 years, and I think by August it will be ready, or even sooner, to be read by some trusted readers before. Yeah.
I volunteer.
You do?
I do.
I pay people to read it, because otherwise I think they don't read it.
Really?
Well, not, a small sum.
Yeah.
Because I would then ask you a few questions.
Of course.
About what made sense or what didn't. But yeah, I'm putting you on the list.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that it makes sense that you're writing a book, because you have had such an incredible life, and it might not be a memoir, but we're going to get into a little of the details of your backstory here. But the reason, what brought me here and the reason that I wanted to talk to you is because you were a very major figure in the Santa Fe art world for quite some time.
Just a great part of my life. From the beginning of opening a gallery when I knew nothing and had no business experience, no background in art. I think I'll start a gallery. And, I had some people who kind of supported the idea of me beginning a gallery, but it was.
But something tells me, and I actually know the answer to this a little bit, but this wasn't your first foray into doing something a little bit off the grid.
No, I think for me, the truth is I've lived my life a little off the grid, and now I'm living literally off the grid, but I did that before. Yes, I'm drawn to adventure and risk, and, if it can be done, maybe I can figure out how to do it. But naivete has been my partner. So,
Beautifully said, because I just actually did a solo podcast giving a little bit of the origin to why this podcast came to be. And part of it was a lark, and part of it was the learning curve, and part of it was like the benefit of not knowing what I was getting into. Ignorance is bliss.
Yes, exactly. And I think I knew that because when I met you, when we last really had any time to talk, you were fairly new in town with big ideas. And I've watched from afar how you have taken ideas and manifested them. Poof, like magic. Or that's how it always seems to people who are watching from afar.
Well, I'm so flattered that you've been watching from afar. And as some people who have listened to my podcast know that urban art tripping, which was my original big idea, which had a lot of potential, but then COVID happened and poof, as you said. Yeah. And so it's really great that I've figured out, for me, it's really great to have figured out how to take some of that energy and kind of pivot and take it into a new direction. But I still get to talk to all my same friends and people. And,
exactly.
I've kind of been able to weave it into a new tapestry.
See, I have a million questions for you, too, for when I start my podcast.
Oh, good.
Not that I'm not going to start a podcast. I was going to do something like that, and I found I don't have the assistance that I need. I love ideas and talking and creating, but I'm not good at nuts and bolts.
Well, you might be able to find people through the community that we have that could assist you with that, because one of the things I wanted to sort of a lost thread, speaking of that, was what happened with the Wonder Institute.
Exactly. What happened with the Wonder Institute?
I wonder what happened with the Wonder Institute.
When I use this phrase, when the gallery failed, but people say, oh no, the gallery didn't fail. But when it closed after 33 years, I was so sad, and I was so alone, and I was so broke, and so at loose ends. And I remember the last day of the gallery in my last location on 2nd Street. Some people helped. I gave all the art back, and I gave a lot of things away. I did not owe any money to any artist, or business people in town, like, framers or shippers. But I owed credit cards almost $100,000. And so I came home. I put all the leftovers, everything that I removed from the gallery in my garage. And somebody helped me ship it all to my house. When they left, I sat on the floor of the garage and I wept. In fact, I could weep now. Such a moment for me. I didn't know, what next? Who am I if I'm not Linda Durham, girl, art dealer? What? And
but you had reinvented yourself before.
I know. So I thought, okay, what do I have? What do I still have aside from debt? I have this big old house, and I have my abiding sense of wonder, which I always have. So, and my house was kind of like an institute. It was big. It had some grand rooms, and so I thought, well, I could start the Wonder Institute. And that's all I had, 2 words, Wonder and Institute. And so then from there, well, if you had a Wonder Institute, what would go in it? And as very little time went on, I found all these ideas, So I had the Worldwide Women of Wonder. I had the Wonder Postcard Project. I started the Museum of Nothing in Particular. And I had salons, and I did small shows in the gallery and events and poetry readings. And it was great, but I had no money, and my house was in danger of going into foreclosure. And so I had to wonder about how do you save your life? How do you keep bankruptcy away from your door? And but not in a practical way, like how do you get a job or what? Because right away I thought, I can now do something I've always wanted to do. I had a dream from my early youth that you could go all the way around the world. I mean, you could start from your door and head left or right or something and keep going and end up back at your door. And it just was it's part of me, the circles and the Mobius strip notion. And so even when I was still in debt and just starting to have the Wonder Institute, I got this idea. I went way up into the mountains and thought and meditated and prayed and tore my hair. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And how do you get things happening? I always had this little formula for, if you have an idea, then you have to declare that idea aloud. And then, you have to proceed, you envision
Figure it out.
Yeah. So I'm going around the world. How will I do that? In debt. I had a lot of great collectors who liked me and whom I liked. And I wrote a very careful letter to 15 people who bought from me, who had, as far as I could tell, lots of money. And I said I wanted to go around the world, and I had a project in mind. And if they would write me a check for $1,000, I would give them something from my collection worth $2,000 or $3,000. So 12 people sent me checks. And then I did a couple of public talks. And
Is that where you used the words that we were talking
no,
about?
that was
That's a different thing.
earlier.
Uh-huh.
I had a project in mind that I made these little discs embedded with wildflower seeds. And the little discs had an image of the earth on one side. And a woman actually helped me make those. And I had people write prayers for peace on the back side. And my idea was I would take them around the world and plant them. And I did. So I planted seeds of peace around the world. And I had enough money. I bought an around-the-world ticket. And then I went around the world. And when I came back, I've always kept journals. I kept notes. And then some magic happens. I don't know. Do you believe in magic? I don't know if you do.
Well, how can one not? Just even listening to the story, if I wasn't a believer before, which I am,
Right.
But that's the kind of thing, I just want to interject, that it was magic before you even started. It was magic getting from the, I wonder how I'm going to do this, to the whatever inspired and came through you to do that. That's where the magic starts.
So wonderful. And that's how the gallery started, I worked for Forrest Fenn for 1 year, and that's its own long story. And at the end of the year, because I had promised him I would stay a year, and I was his director of research. And at the end of the year, I was making $4.50 an hour. And at the end of the year, I wrote a letter for the.
We have some very talkative birds.
We do. Right. We can close.
No, it's fine. It went away.
Yeah. For the better utilization of my time and talent, and I asked for $6 an hour. This was in the late 70s. And his director, Forrest was out of town, and his director laughed when I said I wanted $6 an hour. So I didn't say this, but I thought, well, fuck you. And I resigned that day. And then I thought, now what will I do? And a friend whom I met, a really good art dealer from New York, said, well, you could start your own gallery. And I, well, how would I do that? I don't have any money. My marriage is falling apart. I have 2 kids. And I don't really warm to Remingtons and Russells and the Taos founders. I have friends who are artists. That's the work I like, and they don't have proper representation. So I have that.
There's
idea.
a formula.
There, right. Yes, right. The success of the know-nothing formula. And I even when I worked for Forrest, I thought, why couldn't he take these shows to other places? He didn't like the idea of, like trying to take a show to New York or Chicago. This was before the art fairs. And so I thought, that's what I'll do. And I thought, where could I take a show of New Mexico art by people no one ever heard of? And I thought Toronto. I thought a bit. Toronto would be a great idea because it would be international, and I love the idea of international. But I don't have to worry about how do you get across an ocean. And so I bought a ticket to Toronto. I didn't know anyone, but I knew somebody who knew someone. And I assembled a notebook. I wish I still had it. It would be so much fun. Of slides. Remember pages of slides?
Oh, yeah.
And miscellaneous little gallery invitations of my friends' art. It just so happened that my friends were Paul Sarkisian, Paul Pletka, Alan Graham, Larry Bell. Well, at Larry Bell, I didn't know Ken Price at the time, but he was part of this show. Dick Mason. I had a friend who had an O'Keeffe. 2 people gave me O'Keeffes for my show. Luis Jimenez. And I went to Toronto, and Ford Ruthling, who's a long ago artist in town, knew somebody, a designer in Toronto, and he gave me that name. So first thing I did was go and visit John Schofield, who turned out to be very chic-y, great designer. And he told me, I said, I'm looking for a venue. Just naivete can sometimes take you places. And he said, well, they're building a big complex in a nice part of Toronto. And William Louis Dreyfus is building it. I had never heard of him. But I know now, I mean, he's like an amazing collector. His daughter is Julia Louis-Dreyfus. So I went to meet with him. I took this notebook. I can't imagine how he must have laughed as he turned these pages. But he said, I have a 5,000 square foot space in this building I'm building, you know, as a great shopping center. You can use that. And great. So I came back. I went to the bank. And back then, you know, I said, I have an idea whose time has come. And I talked and talked to this really nice banker. And he said, well, you convinced me. And they loaned me $25,000. I did have a house at the time, but, you know, it was a simple loan. And so I started putting everything together and did that show. Except the show, I did an invitation. I got a mailing list of Toronto collectors and people. And I mailed 2,000 invitations, hand addressed. Carol Mothner and a few other people helped me address them. They were really ugly invitations, but let's skip over that. I didn't know it at the time. And I stamped them and mailed them on the day of the great Canadian postal strike.
Oh, God.
And they never got there. In fact, they might still be in some big mailbox in, you know, Alberta or somewhere. I don't know. So no one came. A couple of my friends.
You didn't know it at the time that you had picked an illustrious day for the mailing.
Well, how could I? It just happened.
Right, it just happened.
I didn't know, you know, that it was pending or anything. I didn't know. And then bang, you know, you read the news. So nothing ever got.
So it probably didn't occur to you that nothing got delivered until nobody showed up.
Well, no. I mean, then it's a big deal. You know, if you have a postal strike.
Yeah.
If we did, no mail's going anywhere. No, I knew, but I didn't know before I mailed them. And what could I have done anyway? And I did an ad for Art in America. No, for Art News. That would embarrass both of us today. It was a Dennis Culver painting of a stylized New Mexico landscape, but fanciful, not real, with the Toronto CN Tower coming out of the middle of it. And the show was called New Mexico in Toronto.
Straightforward.
Yeah. So virtually no one came. I did everything. I got the lights. It looked good. I had really good art. John Fincher was in that show. Carl Johansson, Richard Thompson. Anyway, well, William Louis-Dreyfus bought the big Alan Grahams and became a friend. And so that it didn't get me out of debt. I mean, the show did not. I lost money. But when I got back, all the artists put that show on their resume. And Larry Bell was connected with this impressive group from California who wanted to come to Santa Fe, and I didn't have a gallery. That was the other part. I said the show was part of, sponsored by or presented by Linda Durham Gallery back then. And a few people, I'm sorry, this is such a long story.
But no, it's fantastic. If people could see my face, my jaw is like in my lap.
A few people did wander from down below where there were all these fancy shops, got off on the wrong floor of the elevator and wandered in. And what I remember one person saying, "Oh, we've been to your gallery. We love your gallery. We love Santa Fe." I didn't tell them there was no gallery. And then another beautiful couple came in and said, "Where exactly is your gallery? We're going to be in Santa Fe in July." And I gave them my home address. And
Well, that's thinking on your feet.
I turned when I got back, well, the house we had, I was still married, was the De La Pena house. It's a magnificent house. It's been ruined now by, if I may say, Jerry Peters and subsequent people who took an authentic New Mexico treasure and de-treasurized it, or anyway, I don't know. So I turned a couple of rooms of the house into a gallery, and the collectors that Larry Bell told me about were from SICA, the Society for the the Society for the Encouragement of Contemporary Art. And those people came to my house, and the art was there. And one of the people said, "Would you think of doing a show like you did in Toronto, in the Bay Area?" So that was my second show. And one of the big companies in the Bay Area paid for that show, so it broke even. And then these people from the Scottish Arts Council wandered through. They were on a holiday across America, wandering through New Mexico, and they liked New Mexico, and they thought where could we see art? And they asked somebody at their hotel, a concierge, and she said, "Well, Linda Durham has a gallery." And they came to my house. We had, well, just then I was buying the house on 400 Canyon Road, and I was just opening that. And so we're condensing the timeline a little bit. Otherwise, you'll be here until August. So they came and we talked, and we had a conversation about how New Mexico and Scotland, the art scenes, had something in common because they drew really talented people. They were a magnet for creative individuals, but a little too far from the
Epicenter.
acknowledged centers. And so that one of the two people was the head of the Scottish Arts Council, and we planned a show. I can show you a catalog. And they paid for everything. And this show was called New Mexico. And I had Luis Jimenez, Larry Bell was in that, Susan Rollin, who's not around anymore. I still have two Georgia O'Keeffe's. Who else was in that show? It was a condensed show, but it was elegant, and they paid for everything. And then and it coincided with the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, and then the show went to another venue in Scotland, and it just unfolded. And
well, I just want to interject for a second because, the purpose of this podcast was to, give people a sense of, how do you access the creative field? How do you bring something through you? And every story that you're telling is a beautiful illustration of that. So we can keep going until August because that's the whole idea here.
And then, right. And then you can think tomorrow and say, no, let's just talk about one little thing. I don't know what you want to do, but, I'm thrilled with my life. And we mentioned this a little earlier. You embrace a project or a style or an idea, and you run with it, you gallop with it, you fall on your face with it, and it may end, but it's worthy of staying alive. I wrote a little bit about it in my last memoir, and and then you realize you think that story. I think those 33 years were as big as the world, but then as you look, as time goes by, as other things happen, as you read, live, and continue, it was my world, but it's only tiny.
Yeah.
And it can disappear. That's why it'd be nice to be preserved forever in a podcast.
Assuming the technology doesn't go the way of Betamax, or something like
Right,
that.
right.
But thank you for saying that. But it's really, I think, one of the other happy coincidences, which I didn't have in my mind when I set out on this project, was how wonderful would it be to have a collection of New Mexico artist voices? And I didn't keep it limited to painting, so I've done dancers and writers and musicians, but it's just sometime in a time capsule somewhere, there will be this tiny little bubble of what was happening in this slice of time.
In the voice of the people who were carrying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trudgingly or however. Yeah, no, because I believe this very deeply. New Mexico is a magnet for the creative individual. And and maybe it's northern New Mexico. It's beyond this area. And they don't have it in other states I could name. Okay, Nebraska, it's not there. It's not in any of the other states the way it is in New Mexico. It's in the dirt, and the people are drawn to the dirt or the mountains or the clouds or the sky or the multicultural personality in a manageable size. Mm-hmm. Yeah, New York is way multicultural, and it's its own thing. New Mexico is, it's an amazing place. And in my experience, you look around, you see who made a home here, who made a painting here, who created a fashion world here, who it's an amazing place.
Yeah, it is the origin of a lot of creativity for sure. And what drew you to Santa Fe originally? Because I happen to know that
I was happy in New York, and I met my second husband. I had like a starter marriage at 19 that didn't last very long. And then I met this amazing man, Bart Durham, and he had done his undergraduate work and some graduate work in New Mexico, although he was from Manhasset. And we fell in love. And his dream was to move to New Mexico, whereas my dream was to become famous. I didn't know how, like a famous what, Linda?
Well, you
An
sort of,
actor, a politician, what? And, but love really overtook me, and adventure, the sense that, like maybe there's theater in New Mexico. I don't know. Maybe like, what's out there? He's going, let's go. So that was
and
how I got here.
how far before that did you have that other very interesting chapter of your life, involving bunny ears? Let's just say that.
Well, I moved to New Mexico in 1966. I moved to New York in 1962, and that was when the bunny years.
The bunny ears.
Yeah, and
did you think that maybe your path to fame would be through the bunny ears?
well,
Or was
when
that a
I
launching
moved
pad?
there, I thought, I'll just try out for something. They'll realize my talent, and Broadway will say, "At last, she's here." So it didn't happen like that. I actually moved to New York. I was 19 during the great newspaper strike.
Strikes, and you have something.
I just realized that those were two
Bookends.
Yeah, and what was strike three? We'll get there. And so I was I was naive, but I thought, I need to audition for a part. And, I had great accolades from my college years in the theater, and I worked in the professional theater from the time I was 13 all through high school. So I thought, but there was a newspaper strike. So I went around to employment agencies, and I said, I'm an actor. I'm looking for a theater job.
A gig.
Yeah. And this one guy said, well, they're hiring people at the Playboy Club, but I had never heard of the Playboy Club. But he said, they're hiring, and he gave me an address where they were. And so I went and I filled out this elaborate
Application.
And then they said, okay, well, they were having these mass calls. You had to show up in a leotard or a bathing suit. And your appointment is at 1:20 on Thursday. So I showed up in the leotard, and a million young girls, young women. And I had my interview, and it wasn't Hugh Hefner, but it was one of the big Playboy executives, Tony Roma. Later, I think he had, a series of Italian restaurants. I'm not sure. But he was Tony Roma. And I had this leotard on with 3 buttons on it because I had used it when I was in high school where I was voted most talented. And Tony Roma said, "I like your buttons." Of course, I also had a beautiful figure. So I got the call back, and I got a job. So out of the 15,000 women, they picked 80, and I was one of them. And then I became the head of the training department.
So magic has followed you.
Everywhere, everywhere.
And all I can think of is all the world's a stage, and you just keep taking on new parts.
Yeah, that's it.
And you just,
that is it.
and then you play them to the hilt.
Yeah, and right. And if it's not real, make it up.
Right. Improvise.
Make it real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much of the sort of chutzpah, or whatever you would call it, confidence that you developed to start a gallery, to leave the gallery business, to start writing your memoir, etc. What do you think that the genesis of that was in being a bunny, or was it earlier than that?
I'm not sure I know what you mean, but starting the gallery was, it seemed like an idea too big to handle, but I knew some of the beginning things. I knew artists, and I had worked for Forrest. And working for Forrest, I learned a lot about what not to do and what to do. And I started it, as you know, in my house in those early shows. And then that building on Canyon Road came on the market. And in an instant, I thought that would be a great location for a gallery. By then we were selling our house to Jerry Peters. It was a very bad deal. Bart and I were getting divorced. We split everything. I got $25,000, my second $25,000. And I made that a down payment. And there was somebody else also bidding for that place. It was $200,000. And Forrest Fenn knew the previous owners. And I went to him and I said, I really want this. And he talked to the people, and they accepted my offer.
Wow.
And so I just moved in, and then people came along. I had met people. I hired somebody to be a director.
Magic.
Now I can't think of, somebody said, well, if you had to put the $25,000 down, how did you do that? I don't know.
Right.
I don't remember the money things. I have never had any money for more than, 10 minutes.
Well, it seems like you've got this kind of mechanism where it just flows through you as part of the whole magic equation. I guess the question I was sort of trying to get to is that it seems as natural for you to have gone to New York City and walked into a very unique position of being a bunny as easily as you walked into being a gallerist. And, each step along the way, you wore the buttons, you got the 25 grand. I mean, it sounds like that's just Linda Durham's special sauce.
I don't think that that's just the way Linda Durham made it through. I think you can tap into magic. And what is it? What enables you to tap into magic, willing to risk, imagination, imagination. Just envision it and walk towards it. And it sounds naive, and yes, that's part of it. The naivete doesn't tell you, well, you can't do that. You don't actually have the credentials. It takes, you need much more money. Right. You don't know the art. You don't.
Where's your business plan?
You don't know anything.
Right.
You don't know anything. When I was doing the very first show, and I knew some artists, and I said, I'm going to do a show, and will you be in it? And they said yes. And then Paul Sarkisian said, well, are you going to have Ken Price in your show? And I said, well, who's Ken Price? And he said, you don't know who Ken Price is? No, but I'm going to find out. I got his phone number, and I called him. And I said, Mr. Price, this is Linda Durham. I'm curating an exhibition of contemporary New Mexico artists in Toronto. And Paul Sarkisian gave me your name, and I would like to come and talk to you about it. So he invited me. I got there. You know, he had all his... It was when he was putting together the Happy, I can't remember the name of the show, it's for the LA Museum and LA Museum. Happy's Curio thing. And I looked around at this weird work. I had never seen his work before. I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. And he said, you know, all of this is going to the show, but in California. But you could take this, and he pointed in a plinth with a covering over a plexiglass box. There was this little stand, like a purple velvet stand, and in it was something like a giant peanut resting on the ceramic peanut. And I said, because, you know, I just learned it's Ken Price. I said, oh, that would be perfect. I would love to take that. And so I had these consignment things and we with duplicate paper. What do you call that? Yeah. So he filled everything out. I said, this would be great. And I said, you know, and how much is this? And he said, you can sell it for $9. And I said, that would be great. And I wrote down 900. So he signed it, and I took it, and we arranged. I picked it up, but, I didn't pick it up then. I went home, and I went to a tea party. Rosalind Constable was a friend of mine, and she was an old woman, not as old as I am now, but, you know, she was old. And she had been the avant-garde arts reporter for Time Life. And she was friends with all kinds of great people. And I told her that I had just spoken to Ken Price, and he had given me a piece. And she said, oh, that's wonderful. She's from England. You know, I saw Ken Price not long ago, a little teacup, and I was going to buy it, but it was $9,000, and, I didn't buy it. And I thought, she said, $9,000. Part of this conversation. So that afternoon, I called Ken back, and I said, excuse me, I'm just looking over my consignment forms. Did I inadvertently leave a 0 off your consignment thing? He said, let me look. He said, yeah, you did. And I said, well, just please adjust that. I'm so sorry.
What a good recovery. Holy cow.
Anyway, it's just...
Again, magic. I'm going to have to keep saying it because it's just like keeps showing up.
Everywhere. And sometimes just in the nick of time. Usually just in the nick of time.
Well, that's
and everything leads to everything. And until it doesn't.
Well, what's your next magic trick?
Mine? Rediscovering, who I am if I don't have all that. And what is powerful, significant, exciting when you're 82. I'm 82 and a half. 82 and a half. And I'm discovering that, you know, I hope you're as lucky as I am and you get here and beyond, because it's remarkable. And I can begin to look at things differently and rediscover so much about myself, about what did and didn't happen, what happens next, because I'm really interested. I want to stay healthy, 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 because I want to know what happens next, you know. And but all during those years, my underlife was a life of investigating the world and the people in the world. And
So you've been driven by wonder from the beginning.
yeah, I made a promise to myself when I was really quite young that every year I would go somewhere foreign and exotic, and I would never say that I didn't have the time or the money, because I knew that would always be true. That, you know, but so almost everywhere I've ever gone. Well, that's not true, because as time went on, you know, not that many years ago, I took the Trans-Siberian Railway from Moscow to Vladivostok. And my love, who came into my life also in the nick of time 12 years ago, sponsored me for that trip. And that for that trip, I thought, I'm going to meet people. I'm going to be gone for 6 weeks, I think, 5 weeks. And I'm going to want to have a gift or something to give them. And I'm only taking one small suitcase. So on Facebook, and you might know about this, I said, I'm doing this trip. Would any of my artist friends be willing to give me a small original work of art, a watercolor, a drawing, no bigger than a postcard, that I could take to give to people I meet on my trip? You know, I thought if I get like 10 things, you know, that would be great. I got over 100. And so I did a catalog. I'll give you one.
Oh,
A catalog
God, I would love that.
of that experience, pictures of a lot of the art that people gave me, and pictures of people in Russia holding a piece. And
this is well after the Seed Project.
yeah, oh yeah.
So
this was right before COVID.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And here's a quote that I love, and it's deeply attributed to Goethe, some couplet. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Well, I should have that tattooed across my chest. But I
Not sure
already
there'd
have,
be any room.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, so that is my life. One magic experience after another. And within the big magic thing are all the little ones, the ones that happen every day. And so maybe if I were starting over and rewriting my life, I would just say, you know, the magic within the magic. That's it. And the wonder that is just everywhere. And, you know, in the beginning, you don't wonder about this, and then later on, you do, you know. I never wondered about the planets and the galaxies. But I live with an astronomer, among other things. And it's very hard to live here
and not look up
in the dark, off grid, and not wonder and not listen to the stories about distances, things that, like, no matter how creative you are and imaginative, you can't imagine that it's that far, and that this tiny speck represents something so big you can't imagine it. And I also think something that you would see in a microscope would be...
has a universe inside it. Right.
Yeah, anyway. That's an aside.
Oh, well, it's an aside, but, it leaves me totally speechless. I mean, I feel like we could be here till August just to pick up on, a thread of everything that you've said. But we started with what happened to the Wonder Institute. Now, I know you've just embodied it. You are the Wonder Institute.
If I had a dream or another dream, because I am redoing my small website. My Wonder Institute website is not available right now. It exists somewhere. I want to find it, and it shouldn't die. It shouldn't be something like that was then, this is now, because there's so much more to it. And we did essay contests. I have all the postcards from the postcard project, and it would make you weep to see when, I gave these postcards out and I put stamps on them because that helps you get them back, and had the Wonder Institute address, and on the other side it just said, I wonder. And it was all blank, you could fill in. Some of them, the first batch said, I wonder about, but afterwards, I wonder. And the things people wrote, and I haven't, stacked that high. And some of them make you cry, and some of them are funny. And some of them say, yes, me too. I wonder about this. Will they ever have I wonder if they'll ever have a cure for cancer. One that I remember so clearly. I wonder what ever happened to Jenny. I miss you, Jenny. Love, Mom. I'm a sensitive person.
Well, I mean, it's so deeply touching, and I think we're all so starved for wonder and awe.
Somebody just sent that to me.
Yeah.
Not to me, to the Wonder Institute. And people drew, I could make a book of those cards, but...
Well, you have to stick around for quite a few more years because you've got a lot of work to do.
I do. I got a lot. Yeah. So I built a chapel. That was a project that just, like, what? We'll go out and see it, later, but...
Well, I saw the progress as I followed you on social media, and it'll be a privilege to see it.
But really, I thought when you were coming here, what are we going to talk about? I thought we would be talking about the magnificent artists who trusted me to display their work and by their work, through their work. I had, like, uncountable wonders and experiences of being with their work, seeing people respond to it, taking it to Chicago and Miami and LA and New York and Spain and Germany. And, in Germany, no, in Spain, at the big Arco Fair, the King of Spain walked through my booth and saw the art, and other people and wondrous people. And, that's the same thing. That, like, how did I know to show this work and that work? A whole lot. Going back to the beginning days, I didn't know anything, but I had a real sense of who did. And I listened to them. And mainly the people who knew something that could help me choose and do. Artists, everything. The most important information I ever got about living a life during those years, information came from artists. How to look, how to see.
Well, that's exactly the purpose of this project, is to bring that into living rooms across the world.
Yeah.
Because those insights are so valuable.
I'm looking at that Erica Wanamaker. It was David Anderson, another artist, who said, you ought to look at Erica Wanamaker's work. And it was Alan Graham who said, you should look at Richard Hogan's work. And it was Richard Hogan who said, you should look at Lucy Mackey's work. And it went like that. It was Jean Newman who said, do you know John Cannell? It unfolded like that. And eventually, I could see not what they saw necessarily, but what I could see. I could see. And I don't know how it happened, but for me, there came a time when I could look at something and say, there's something in here that's much bigger than my opinion. But it ends up seeming like my opinion if I hang it on the wall of my gallery. But there's something here. I want to be around it. I want to.
Well, when you're an open vessel for the energy that is being expressed by the vehicle, might be an artist over there, but they're tapping into that field, and all you're doing is being sort of a radio station tuning it in.
What is that field, And thank you for letting me play in the field.
Yeah.
Really. And then, once you're looking at magnificent work, once you're talking with the person who manifested it, it just fills you. I am filled. Well, I would say it on one day, filled to overflowing, but the flow goes on. It'll never be empty. Certain things change. Certain things now I like for a different reason. I still collect work when I can. Not necessarily work, this would have been perfect in my gallery, or, this is just what the gallery would have shown. But something in it. And sometimes it's like, I know how sincere this artist is. I know this, came from a really thoughtful, deep, spiritual, intellectual also, extremely smart place, and I want to support it. If I had money, I would still be buying a whole lot, collecting, giving away, because it's still out there. It's harder to find. For me, it's a little harder to find now, partly because, well, there's so much out there now, and there are so many people who have either decided to be an artist or open a gallery or begin to collect, and and not all of it. I think it's wonderful to decide to be an artist.
Well, if I may say, I mean, one of the things that, you have matured and developed such a sophisticated attunement to authentic work that for somebody to connect with you, they have to be deeply in their practice.
And that term, authentic, And so we all have it, I think. I mean, we don't all display it or notice it or realize that we have it, but that's just it. The great artists, in my opinion, are doing their authentic work. Yeah. And so, you get these, little feelers that go out. And yeah, maybe I don't like it, but it's authentic.
Right.
And
I think that once we attune to authenticity, we can see it not just in the art world, we see it in a doctor, in a gardener, in a,
in the
name, insert profession here, or non-profession.
In the poem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the wonder and the mystery and the pondering is that, what is our authentic life? If that was the question that is sort of at the heart of what you have lived your life, what I'm trying to do is, how do we find that expression of our authentic selves?
Yeah.
And you've certainly given us
you
lots
go
of ways
through all different things, and you wander here, you open this door, and you read that book, and you go here, and you talk to whomever, and it all matters. It all adds to it. If, in fact, you are open to asking yourself that question, the basic question, what more am I? Who am I? It sounds so trite, but figuring it out and
gives us the whole journey.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I'm going to end it there. Well, thanks for joining us today. Please like and follow us on artstorming.org, where you'll find a list of our shows, a transcript of this episode with links to the guest page, as well as our other projects. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms.